Hi, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion webinar on gaining a business advantage with food traceability. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to go over. First is the AIM North America Antitrust and Collaboration and Work Product Policy. It is the policy of AIM North America to conduct its operations in strict compliance with the antitrust laws. No AIM North America activity shall create even the appearance of a violation of the letter or spirit of those antitrust laws. And AIM North America committee meetings or webinars like today are held for the primary purpose of advancements in our industry, which necessarily involves development of work product intended solely for the public domain. AIM North America has developed this policy for the protection of its members who engage in this important collaborative effort. Lastly, you'll notice that you are muted, but we do want you to participate on this webinar. Anytime throughout the presentation, you can send us your questions by using the Q&A option at the bottom of the application screen. We will be answering questions at the conclusion of our final presentation. This webinar is also being recorded and you'll be notified when it is available. And just a little bit about AIM North America. We are the premier alliance for the automated data capture technologies industry. For more than 20 years, AIM North America has championed the growth and acceptance of these technologies and applications through education, standards, community, and advocacy. AIM North America supports consensus-based standards, promotes community, advocates, and educates. AIM North America champions concerns and solutions to industries and governments to break down market barriers and constraints. AIM North America has the recognition to be taken seriously and to help you to be successful in the marketplace. So let's get into the panel. I have John DiPalo, the Chief Strategy Officer of Axis, who will go over today's session and kick things off. John, take it away. John, you are muted right now.
That was a good start. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. Thanks for joining our webinar on gaining a business advantage with food traceability. So what we're going to talk about, and we have a great panel assembled today to kind of go through not necessarily the nuts and bolts of compliance, but really how can we think about utilizing the parameters of food traceability and the requirements around food traceability to gain a business advantage and to build pieces into your business and into your supply chain processes and into your interaction ultimately with your end customers to build out trust and loyalty and be able to enable traceability kind of as a side benefit of that, right? So what we're going to talk about is really about how foundations that you put in place in order to support traceability will really help you, work with the new regulations that are coming out. What's the difference between a compliance solution and a traceability solution, and how being compliant with FSMA and other regulations can work as a competitive advantage for your company. And to do that, I'd like to introduce our fantastic panel that we have assembled today. And just by introduction, my name is John DiPalo. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for a company called Axis, based just outside of Philadelphia. And we specialize in unique identification and track and trace solutions for the supply chain. And what I want to do is just go around the panel here, have them introduce themselves and what their role is within their organizations. And John, why don't we start with you?
Hey, thanks, John. I'm John Wirthlin. I'm an industry principal for our manufacturing, transportation, and logistics verticals. And my role as a subject matter expert is to take my logistics background, my IT background in infrastructure and application development, and then connect the dots with not only Zebra solutions, but solutions from our partners and in the industry in general to help guide our customers. And I'm happy to be here.
Great. Felix, you want to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thank you, John. I'm Felix Amiri, and I'm glad that you're joining us on this webinar. I help food companies primarily as a consultant, independent consultant, and in any area, whether it's food safety quality assurance or things like traceability and operations improvement, those kinds of areas that I help small to medium companies, mostly because the large ones already have their own people. But I also teach at the college level, teaching, preparing students who are entering the industry, the food industry, in a managerial or supervisory role. So I teach the postgraduate certification courses in the postgraduate certification program, and majority of my courses relate to regulations.
Thanks,
That's
Felix.
me.
And Sharmeen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. So glad you're joining us. I am the founder and chief marketing officer of OpSmart. OpSmart is a food safety and traceability software platform. We are cloud-based and we work across the board in all food industries. So I have clients who are farmers and who grow produce, and then we deal with livestock clients who are in the poultry industry, from all the way from chicks to the retail end, and also with grains and rice growing and all of that, including feed mills. So we work across all those verticals and provide deep down traceability to all your sources, and from source to fork, I guess.
Excellent. You know that, Sharmeen, your introduction, kind of around working with different companies and different sizes really leads me, to the first question for the panel. And, what do you see companies doing, from an adoption perspective? Is it, do you see companies going all in? Are they looking at a minimal adoption level? What are you seeing across the companies that you're working with today?
In the United States, I see companies currently, especially in the produce industry, because FSMA is still a proposed law, becomes law, we're hoping in January of next year. Currently, especially when I speak with, and the last 2 weeks, I've spent a great deal of time in my area. I live outside of Washington, D.C., in the Virginia countryside. I've been talking to a lot of small farmers. A lot of the smaller farmers, mid-sized farmers, they're all aware, which was really good news. They're all aware. They know what traceability is. They know what transparency. They understand there's a thing called FSMA. Do they understand what exactly it is, how it applies to them? No. So I think many of them are aware, interested, intrigued, and want to get into it. But until it becomes, the regulation is kind of in front of them that, okay, you must implement it. These are your rules, these 5 that you must have if you're growing tomatoes or lettuce or eggs, or do you have a kill step? Don't you have it? I think they're all starting to be engaged, especially in the small, medium-sized farms, but are yet to kind of take the next step, is what I have found, especially in the last 2 weeks.
Interesting. So we're starting to see some momentum, and starting to see some interest, but adoption is still lagging a little bit behind. Now, just to follow up on that one, do you think that they are looking at it purely from a regulatory perspective and not seeing the benefits potentially that they could get out of a traceability solution? Do you think that is, kind of the difference in doing something versus thinking about doing something?
I think the regulatory aspect definitely is creating a momentum. However, some of the farms I spoke with, they absolutely realize the business benefit of it, how they will be able to better control their profit margins and control the variances within their supply chain, and better understand the cause and effect of using a certain feed or a certain pesticide. So no, I don't. I think the farmers that are aware and very involved in their business practices and work it like a business rather than just a CSA, I think absolutely see the benefit at the business side of it. Definitely.
Excellent. That brings me to a topic, Felix. I want to tap into kind of both sides of your experience, both on the academic side as well as kind of working with businesses. There's 2 ways to look at this type of an approach, right? From a compliance perspective or from a traceability perspective. But, the challenge I think that people need to think about is, what am I putting in, and is a compliance solution good enough to achieve traceability, or is that really an insufficient approach? So kind of what are your thoughts about that, and what are you hearing from the people that you're talking to?
Yeah, thanks, John. The general tendency is to focus on compliance because of the heavy-handedness that regulations bring into the process. But really, when an operation at any stage, an operation is looking at traceability from compliance perspective, well, that is the minimum. That is the starting point. But there has to be a recognition that traceability does more than just meet the regulations for you. And so the other aspect of what does traceability actually do for you as a business, which will be the perspective that leads you to pursue traceability on your own, even if the regulator is not looking for it, is the understanding that, yes, it does help in so many ways. Say you're an organic farmer and you don't properly identify your produce. You can imagine the difficulty to prove that your product is organic because you're not able to track it. And then your customers, if you cannot track your product and track the development or the production of your product, your customers will not have confidence to buy from you because they would be thrown into the ambiguity of not being able to trace their own products when they use your product in their operations. So traceability helps you from that perspective as well. And from that basis, I would say compliance is the minimum. You want to set yourself up with strategies that help you to actually work with your customers and gain their confidence in continuing to buy from you. So that's the business advantage, because you're going to get customers trusting that you can track your material, which help them to track their own products. And so they have that confidence that lead them to buying from you as a business advantage for you and for them as well.
Interesting. And I guess that applies both to end consumers as well as other businesses that are, purchasing your products as intermediate products, which they will then, kind of further produce into their finished goods. So I guess that cuts across both, B2B as well as B2C operations. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's true. And from the consumer perspective, I posted on LinkedIn recently the question, how does traceability help you to gain the confidence of consumers? And in fact, I identified the three parties: your customers, which are the main operators using your product, the regulators, and the consumers. How does traceability actually help you gain their confidence? Well, it's not from the compliance perspective, because the compliance right now, the FSMA and the rule that's coming out is only asking you to provide records and reports of your traceability. Well, if you give the records and reports of your traceability to consumer, they will say, fine, I know where the food is coming from, I know what process has gone through, I know what stages it's gone through, and to whom and from whom it's coming into the store. They have all of that. But you realize that they are actually not measuring that in terms of buying your product or the product that your produce goes into. They're not looking at that specifically, except the most sophisticated ones, but they're looking at another criteria. How does traceability help you meet that criteria? And to be specific, the criteria that the food is of good quality and it is safe. So what criteria and how does traceability help you do that? Well, the strategies that you put in place would help you determine, and I call it intelligence gathering from your traceability data, information that softwares can or technology can help you gather. Excuse me. But you need to gather intelligence from that data in order to take specific steps that ensure the quality and the safety of your product. Say, for example, you're buying grain or you produce grain, and usually grain productions are are commingled at the distribution level. So your farm, if you don't have good traceability, you're commingled with another produce. You will not have dates of when they were shipped to them or some of those information. And then another farmer has a mold problem. Well, now you are implicated and you have no traceability to prove that you're not part of that. So that's a quality food safety consideration. And moldy product, of course, would not, irrespective of how much data you give to consumers, moldy products will not gain you their business.
Right. So it's interesting, around your comments. A lot of the ability to create traceability and the ability to capture information, requires different types of technology, right? And John, I want to come to you on this one, as an expert in the field of data management, data collection, product marking, and the work that you're doing over at Zebra. Kind of give us your perspective from what you're seeing as in kind of what's new in technology, what is coming out, how should people think about leveraging technology in this journey of traceability?
Well, I think that's a good question. We are overall at Zebra, we're seeing a real push since COVID started, right? It's put a credible demand on increased, supply needs. But then, of course, you have the labor shortage, right? And we're seeing that across all, but we're really seeing a hard hit in our hospitality, especially in our quick service restaurants. So what we're finding just in general, John, is that companies that may be using a clipboard or a spreadsheet, to track what's in the back room, right? They're probably using barcoding, but there's nobody there to barcode, right? So we're seeing a tremendous move from more of a worker initiated type of data capture, like I just talked about, to more of a sensor based capture, right? And so we're seeing a lot about with RFID being able to capture product where it's coming in the door automatically and not having to have somebody capture that, but also being able to capture, information like lot codes and expiration dates, like Felix was talking about. So I can automatically generate data to say, hey, by the way, this lettuce is going to expire in 2 days. Why don't we make sure we move that to the front of the shelf versus, the back of the shelf, right? But again, the more sensor-based information we can get is really where we're seeing the technology. I was just thinking, if you've been through a drive-through lately, usually there's a first window that takes your money, and the second window that you get your food from. I'm noticing a lot of times that first window is closed, right? Just because they can't fulfill the labor obligations that are needed to run the business the way it's designed. Now put on top of it trying to compete to make sure that the right product is there, it's quality product, and it's available. That's where we're seeing a big push with major what we call QSR, quick service restaurants. So I see that trend continuing. And like Felix and Sharmeen said, that's giving organizations a better understanding of where product are and what's going on. In some of these quick service restaurant chains, there's 150 different manufacturers or providers that are providing the lettuce, the tomato, the ketchup, all these different things. So the supply chain is very, very complex, because these organizations, these quick service restaurants, it's not just, when you and I grew up, 20 years ago, there was, you went to one store for a particular product. Now there's a plethora of different, menu options that make that supply chain more complex.
Yeah, and what I've been seeing, and again, your perspective on this is as we go through, is when I first started in this space, barcode was relatively new into manufacturing, and there was one way of doing things, and now we're seeing kind of the advent of this high level of multimodality, right, where it may be QR code for the consumer, and it may be RFID for the distribution, and it may be barcoding at manufacturing. What are you seeing from kind of this mix of different marking technologies, and from a cost perspective, what should people anticipate around leveraging kind of these different technologies?
Well, you nailed it, John. It's barcoding, it's 2D barcoding, it's RFID, and they're all coming together as one technology on one label, right? That's able to do lots of different things: collect information, track the physical presence of when something enters a facility or a restaurant, or, is able to light up a facility, let's say a distribution center, because there's been, a recall. So we got to find a particular lot number. That happens every day, right? But trying to find those products, through a large distribution center is a nightmare. And that's something that, RFID is able to, kind of help guide you where those products are. And so you can collect them and avoid them getting into the supply chain downstream to our families, right? So we're seeing a lot more capabilities of technologies like RFID. I think in the last 2 or 3 years that technology has matured in technical viability, and the cost of the inlays that go along with those current labels has come down tremendously. So we're seeing a huge adoption of that. And originally, we all thought, oh, the manufacturer, grower, or whatever in this case, what's in it for them, right? And we're finding that there's a lot in it for them. And as we've talked about, compliance really becomes a byproduct of just giving the visibility of what's happening within these businesses. They're able to improve and make things more efficient, because we're not seeing the labor shortage really going away. We're certainly seeing, hopefully, that will improve, but the ability to have to do more with less is so relevant that these modernization projects that 2 years ago may take 5 years, customers are trying to get to that in a year. So it's certainly a very interesting time, and we're fortunate that there's technology that can enable these processes.
Absolutely.
Right. John, if I could add one thing to that discussion, is another way of looking at it is something I guess that could be called maybe the Amazon effect. To say that Amazon is the largest company in the world, so on and so forth. Looking at it from the consumer perspective, again, not putting regulation at the forefront, but putting the consumer at the forefront. We as consumers like to shop at Amazon because I know when that book I ordered, or when that curtain I ordered, whatever it is, I know exactly when it will arrive, exactly where it is in that movement of goods in the supply chain. And I think customers want control of their product that they're consuming. And I think COVID has taught us and made almost everyone aware that food is global. It's traveling from one end of the world to the other. And we want to know where our food comes from. Eating local, eating organic, eating clean is a huge surge in the food industry, because people are scared. They don't want to buy the banana or the fish or whatever that came from an unidentified source, which then leads to the whole discussion of food fraud. I mean, I won't go into that, but then there's always that aspect. And by having RFID, having traceability, transparency, you definitely do remove all of those doubts from your consumer and elevate your product to a different level.
Absolutely. I think the marketplace and the competition is fierce, right? But the awareness and the information of what companies are doing is top of mind to consumers. We now know, through, lots of different advertisements and things of the companies, that when you go in and you look at a, salad bar ingredients, you're finding companies that are taking that very seriously. And that if I go to, QSRA, they're very, they're known for their freshness of their products, versus QSRB, you may know something bad, or you may not know anything at all. Where are you going to go spend your money? It's just a common sense thing.
Yeah. I think that brings up kind of an interesting thought process is, when you look at compliance-based solutions, right? So if you look at a FSMA-based solutions or a CSA-based solution that we saw in the pharmaceutical industry, they tend to be very siloed, right? They do one thing, they get you compliant, and the discussions we're having here around how you can best utilize your system really require you to think about it in a cross-functional perspective, right? So how can I, move my traceability, not just to report on and to fulfill a certain requirement, but to be able to actually leverage that, across my business, which is really, the topic of discussion today. And it's great as we start to work through, some of these examples as to how that becomes very apparent that this non-siloed approach is important. But Felix, I want to go to you for a minute, because I think there's an important question that people need to think about as they put these systems in place, and it's, how does it work? What's the efficacy of the systems, and how can I measure that? So I know that you think about those things, and so how should a company look at confirming the efficacy of what they're doing from a traceability perspective?
Exactly. Does it make sense? Is really the question. And every operation, the adoption's reluctance is the consideration of the cost. So every operation is thinking about the cost. How much is it going to cost me to get into all of this technology? But as we have spoken, Sharmeen and John have mentioned, you can't go it alone, and you cannot do it with your own old paper and pencil approach. You need technology. But then that's where the question of cost comes in, and you're measuring return on investment, which is part of the efficacy, but also whatever you have adopted or purchased, what is it doing for you, and how do you measure that? Well, there are so many avenues for measuring that. First of all, let's talk about the adoption, not going alone. Make sure an operation should make sure that they collaborate with all, even the suppliers of technology, with strategically, so those who are supplying technology will know what they need, what that operation needs, and the operation will be feeding information to the technology supplier. So it's not a going alone situation. You don't just sit back and pick a technology from the shelf and use it. You need to collaborate with people who provide the technology. And if you don't know, work with consultants who can guide you through actual criteria based on your needs to come up with the strategic, the technology partners that you could work with. And then how do you measure if the adopted technology is working? Again, it comes from the perspective that I mentioned earlier. And the simple answer to that is you measure the quality and safety performance of your product, the profiles of your product. If you find that you're getting a lot of returned products, then you're not actually making business. So you want to make sure that through traceability in the use of technology, the product that you sell meets the quality interests or needs of your consumers. And that's one way to measure whether what you're actually doing is producing the desired effect, because your desired effect is that you have continuing business, ongoing business, and return on investment. And these are some of the things you measure. Now, there are more technical things to measure on a day-to-day basis to see that your input material that has been well traced is actually has the profile that you need for your quality management. That's the more technical aspect of traceability. And you can measure that and measure it from the perspective of supply, even from supply sources. If you look at one supplier, the profile, your quality profile is not as good as you want, but the other supplier, the quality profile works for you better. How are you going to know without actually tracking to that supplier or this other supplier? Traceability is essential for even those action points and steps in decision making. And you can measure that in terms of whether technology is providing, or traceability program is providing the value that you need. So several aspects that you can measure, John.
Excellent, excellent. And so, Sharmeen, I want to come to you around, because you talk with large and small companies, and it circles a little bit back, but I want to hone in on something that Felix talked about, which is, what's the right way to go about this, and what is causing this adoption reluctance? Is it fear of cost? Is it something that they think they can just do internally and it'll be good enough? And what are you hearing from your customers, short-term versus long-term solution around how this adoption process is or is not happening?
So, I mean, there's a philanthropy of answers and a lot of people taking different ways of looking at it. There's always the group of people who want the Band-Aid, right? They're like, it's okay. I got Excel. I can see my data. I don't really need to know what somebody else is doing. Very recently, when I was at the International Fresh Produce Organization's food safety meeting, I sat next to a young lady and we started talking about what she does and this and that. I won't speak to the name of the organization she works for. She works for one of the largest grocery chains in America. Their human resource, their accounting, their inventory, their production, their retail, they're all of those computer systems are separate. And they are still, and they choose to be called sustainable on certain levels, but they're not, they're all siloed. And when I spoke to her, I said, well, of course, I'm always like, well, we can solve all your problems and connect everything. No, we've got it covered. They're working at it. So, and I hear that all the time. They're working at it. They've got a solution. So I think it's, again, the same thing. There is awareness that the adoption is needed. They're aware that it's going on, but they don't understand that something Felix touched on, business intelligence has value when it is the right data collected. Collecting all sorts of odd information does nobody any good until you can connect all the dots and you can say this production line, this field, this farm, this employee, this store, this product, and you can connect it all. And then in case of recalls, you can do the recalls and trace it back to the field, to the farm, to the employee, to the production line, until you can go back and forth and utilize that intelligence in a pragmatic and productive manner. Having those silos of information does you no good. And I think it will take forms such as these conversations again and again to occur in order for it to become an understanding like, okay, we really need to do this. We need to connect all the dots. It's coming, and I think people know it, people understand it. And the cost is there, but I think it's more understanding and less cost.
Yeah, agreed. So, and Felix, I want to come to you on something tangential to the answer to that question, and it really revolves around culture, right? So corporate culture, and this is actually for the whole panel, around what changes, how do you handle change management? How do you handle corporate culture as a part of this transformation to a traceability solution, and how do you get people involved in it? So what are you seeing? What are you hearing? Kind of from the people that you're speaking to. Felix, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversation around culture, and the first thing you hear, if you're for the food industry anyway, the first thing you hear companies say right now, and it's a vogue, is food safety culture. But without the realization that that is very narrow, too siloed, that it's actually going to be counterproductive to pursue food safety culture. Because essentially, from the people I've talked to, when you are discussing food safety culture with them, they go back to the same CGMPs that the FDA and regulatory bodies are talking about. You talk about your hygiene, hand washing, and whether the practice is constant that way. And the scope is so narrow that the conversation we're having right now is out of the picture. The culture is not including the opportunities that are out there and the knowledge and the culture scope that includes technological solution providers, because that's all part of the culture. But there's always a larger culture, the industry culture. And that's part of the things we're discussing here. Why is there reluctance in adoption of technology that helps? It's because of old industry culture of just saving cost at all costs, so to speak. But that's a culture that needs to give way to a culture of strategic planning, a culture of intelligence use of data, and a culture of collaboration that extends beyond the boundaries of or the walls of one company, even the walls of one industry, to expand that understanding of culture, that when you as an operation is building your culture, it's not just within the confines of your walls, but that culture need to reach out, even including regulators and what they're looking for, including technology, academia, to get that full culture of industry that actually works for you. And incidentally, it works for everybody to the same degree. So yeah, the scope of culture and corporate culture need to understand the scope beyond the bounds of your wall and include all of these elements that we're discussing.
Great. Hey, John, I want to go to you on your perspective on that, because I know that with your travels around, you often get kind of at the sharp end of the stick, right? So where things are happening on the floor and things are moving quickly and kind of outside of corporate and actually down at the individual facilities. So talk a little bit about culture from your perspective in doing a transformation like this.
Well, if it ain't broken, it's worked for 20 years, why change it, right? That's pretty much what we see, and I think what the other panelists are echoing. I was in logistics back in the Air Force in the early 90s, right? And a lot of these people that we're talking with that are decision makers have been doing the same thing, using barcoding or spreadsheets or whatever for 20 some years, right? And it's a matter of how do we help them understand, different ways of doing it that aren't going to threaten the current processes that they've relied on. And it's about, us as Zebra, we are realizing that our new scanner isn't a solution, it's a component, right? And we have to talk with different personas outside of IT. IT obviously is an enabling entity in any organization, but what we really need to get to is the personas that own the problem, that own, getting fresh produce to their next customer in the supply chain. And it's a discussion with operational personas at that VP or director level. And so we're seeing that the conversation is shifting to to talk with the person that has the problem, right, to solve within the organization. And we're getting better at that. And the more that we can get closer to the operation and closer to the problem, the more that we can affect change and really understand how technology can help. And at the top of your question, John, it's really an understanding that technology doesn't make a change, people do. And what I tend to do is I tend to try and find the person that's been there the longest, is set in their ways more than anybody else. And if you can help that person kind of understand, here's a good, better, best approach, and the numbers that go along with that and the impact that they can have, then it tends to come together very well.
Sharmeen, just from from your perspective on change management and culture and things like that, just give us some thoughts on that as it relates to this.
I think I agree with what John said. I think you have to get the buy-in from top management. Definitely, you have to get them on board. They have to agree. They have to understand. Recent conversation I had with a poultry company, the question was like, what their main question, well, we have this, what is this going to do for us? So you have to get the buy-in. But once you get the buy-in and you're actually trying to create the perfect solution, I think it is a matter of talking with the people who are actually on the floor, actually doing the work. Because oftentimes top management has a general top view of it, but they don't really know what the problem is on the line. Or, the workers will tell you, well, when this, chicken comes up, or when the chicken breasts come up, we have to do this extra motion or this extra movement. And how are you going to fix that? And understanding their problem and then explaining it to them. And once you actually get them on your team and help them understand that you can make their life easier, I think it's very quick to be adopted then. And it's not a matter of culture or safety, it's a matter of making their life easy.
Right.
And I agree. I mean, the best walkthroughs that I do, and which is the favorite part of my job, is when we have not only a decision maker at a top level joining us for that walkthrough, but we have the site manager and some people that are actually doing the job, and we're having that very transparent conversation about the workflow and what some of the processes are. And then I'm able to identify what relevant solutions and technologies, can make a difference in that area. But it's got to be a very transparent two-way conversation.
Yeah, and I guess the takeaway, that I get from listening to the conversation is really, as you're doing this journey, kind of fully understanding what the processes are, what the flow is, where things can possibly break down, what are the exceptions, and also are there, areas that you can streamline things and improve things, and then look to make that cross company, right? Because certainly a lot of the companies that we talk with, one facility is vastly different than another facility, which is vastly different than a third. And, trying to build that into a process map, 50, 60, 70 different times, can be challenging. So, can you look at this as also an opportunity to, do some level of standardization and optimize processes across your supply chain, which again becomes a benefit when you take a look at from an ROI perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
John, I want to,
Yep,
if I could add a little bit about the management, top management that Sharmeen mentioned. One good thing about top management, I use the example of the food industry. The audit systems expect top management commitment. And I've often said there is no operation where the top management is not committed. It's just what they're committed to. And usually their commitment is to the profit of the organization. They are fully committed there. So the strategy that I often use when I'm consulting is, okay, let's start there. That's where you're committed. You want your operation to make profit, but how? That is where the questions, the discussion comes into how. And then I go into what method, what means, what tools in that how, and what resources, your people. And if you know that this is how you're going to achieve that commitment, you're committed to profit, then why not pay attention to those elements in order to actually develop the how to go to the profit? So top management, they're already committed, and we can leverage on that commitment, but guide them to understand that there are intricacies in that commitment that actually achieve or lead to success, their successfulness. I have been able to get some top management to buy into looking for those tools, technology, resources, the right people, training, which is part of the resources. So it's a strategy. It's not an overnight thing that you can do. It's a cultural change, a cultural way of thinking. But the conversations need to start from where they are, where their intentions are, and work with them to bring them back to where they are in terms of what they need to do and to acquire.
Yeah, interesting. I want to switch gears a little bit. There's two more topics I want to cover in today's discussion. Interestingly enough, our next topic, revolves around how sustainability fits into this, and we actually got a question from the audience around how sustainability fits into this. So I'm going to combine all of that together, and Sharmeen, I'm going to go to you on this one to start. Because there's a lot of focus now on sustainability and sustainability programs, and companies have them in. The difference between, or how can a traceability program fit into sustainability versus a compliance program fit into sustainability? So, just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sustainability is a huge issue. It connects us with our planet, connects us with our now understanding that resources are limited: water, soil, seafood. And it plays. I mean, I speak with a lot of growers in Middle East, Southeast Asia, where it's very hot and water is limited. And so the use of IoTs connected with your traceability that is recycling the water. A lot of the closed environment agricultural facilities, I think they're called CEAs, they monitor the use of soil and water and ingredients very carefully because they want to reuse them, recycle them. Regenerative agriculture is a huge growing field. So I think they're connected because the point of traceability is not just to be like, you use this and you use this. The point of it is to gather data to make a better system within your organization and to provide a better product for your end user. So if you can gather that information from your IoTs, if you can understand what you fished, where you fished it, and what are the fish limits or fishing limits in that particular area, you do a service to your environment, to the oceans, to our children, not to overfish. Therefore, there is the huge insurgence of farmed fishing because of sustainability, because it is a controlled environment. You control the product, you control the ingredients or the items used, the water, the feed, and all of that. So I think they're interlinked. If you are a conscientious grower, if you are a company that wants to have the highest product margin while reutilizing your resources, I think they're interconnected and related.
Excellent. And then, with the time we have left, and then, we have a couple of questions that have come in. Let's talk about standards and the use of standards, and how people should think about that. Let's view on, there are national and international regulations, and how should companies proceed from a standards perspective, and where can they get more information?
Could I jump in there?
Yep.
Standards. First of all, we have to define what we mean by standards because, and this is where confusion is. Some industries, pharmaceutical, food, have standards of operation, mode of operation that they call standards. And sometimes the tendency is to impose one standard and think that it fits every operation situation. And so from that perspective, standards could be counterproductive in terms of following them. However, if you understand what that standard is doing for you, then you can strategically plan and adopt systems and procedures and steps to work with that standard. Standard should not be viewed as the big stick that is brought on you, but rather as a tool that could help you progress or be successful in your operation. That's one aspect. The other aspect of standards that I see is that we have to have a common language. If we don't, then of course, we cannot understand each other. There will be confusion and anarchy and so forth. So we need to develop standards that give us a common language of understanding so that when I say something, you immediately know what it is. I don't have to spend so much time explaining and interpreting because we have that standard. So from a language perspective, standards are very useful. The good example of standards that differentiates from the one I described for pharmaceutical and food with the technology aspect of things, GS1 standards. Okay, they give you a common language for understanding that when you use a certain code, that is understood to mean a certain thing, and everybody understands that. So standards from that perspective are very helpful, and adopting standards or working according to those standards from those perspectives help every operation. And in the collaborative sphere of things, that also helps because you don't need to re-explain things. You just use the standard. Everybody collaborating in the operation for the success of the operation will be speaking that same language. So I would support things like GS1 standards, whereas I would subject the other types of standards that are suggested from the industry to further scrutiny. From the perspective of how much of it is helpful and how much of it is not, in order to strategically plan your operations and processes.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Felix. GS1 standards are, when I'm looking at a customer and talking to them about modernization efforts, it's table stakes, right? If you can't communicate with your outside of your organization then you're dead in the water, right? And not only, from a compliance perspective, but just trade, knowing that the G10, the Global Trade Identification Number, is the same in both, the shipper system and the receiver system. So we know what we're talking about is what's needed. And, with FSMA, we're looking at not only our key data elements that we're putting onto the barcode or the 2D barcode or, the EPC of an RFID tag. We all have to understand what those items are, and then what are those critical tracking events and how they're going to be represented within those transactions. And it's a lot of that work has been done, but it's the foundation for building the house that we're all trying to build here together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to put a plug in for our hosts today as well, the AIM Global organization, there's a lot of information available there as well. And you certainly can get involved. And one of the benefits of working with AIM is, you can help in influencing, right? And certainly you can do that in GS1 as well. So the more you get involved, the more you can influence, kind of how things are delivered. But also the networking, ability to learn from your peers and from others within both of those groups is fantastic. So I would recommend getting involved, in the standards groups as well as in industry groups, because the amount of information that people are willing to share is tremendous. So we're coming up on our time here, towards the top of the hour. And I just wanted to let our panelists just kind of go through any closing remarks that they may have around, how to get started. What's the thought process that people should think about, to start this journey off? Because it can be a big one. And how do you think about, what are the first steps? So Sharmeen, I'll go to you first on that one.
Yeah, I think the first step is having the conversation. I believe in small steps. I think the first thing is have a conversation. Choose a specific area that you want to work on. And don't think of it as that, oh no, now I have to go do my whole company. It's going to cost me millions of dollars. I can't afford it. Okay, we're not even going to look at it right now. Let's talk about it. Let's use one area of your organization to create a footprint of traceability, transparency, IoTs. And then once you get that up and going, duplicating it across the board in other aspects of your company is very easy and doable. So give any of us a call. All four of us are here and would love to help you on your journey to move in the correct direction.
I'll piggyback on that comment by Sharmeen there. If you're starting on a journey, you can't take all the steps at once. That's when you give up. So piggybacking on that suggestion, take one step at a time. It's definitely a good advice for any operation. And to break that down a bit, I would say for an operation, if you're not sure where to start, well, there are obligations, and that's the word I use typically. There are obligations that you need to consider. The law is an obligation. Your customer and consumer, they impose some obligations. So break that down. Which one is going to give you the greatest problem more immediately than the other? That is where you focus. With respect to traceability, I would say the law is coming. Make sure you understand the law and take the steps to meet it. And we do know that that's compliance. So that's just the bottom rung of the ladder, you might say. But that's a step to start. Understand you have someone who can read the law and the requirements and help your organization meet it. That's one. Then how do you expand from there will be the next step. If it is to keep records, that the law is saying I must keep records on certain commodities, then how do I keep the records is the next stage. So you go say, okay, what tools do I need to keep these records well and recover those records well? And that's where your second stage will be considering what technology or software system use. So I would incrementally go those steps to proceed in terms of dealing with all of these, but don't try to do it all at once. You will give up.
John?
Yeah, and I echo, what Sharmeen and Felix have said, but I also believe that you have to partner with somebody that that you're willing to, again, have transparent conversations with, and really open yourself up and show them your workflows, and show them your processes, and let people help you to understand what's the right tool in the right area. When you think about the whole supply chain, out in the field, barcoding is probably just fine, with a rugged device. In a manufacturer or distribution area, RFID or fixed industrial scanning, the use of robotics are come into play. And then, at a quick service restaurant, there's all kinds of different applications, from a mobile device, that has a barcode reader, and maybe a sled that can be added, to do back end inventory. It's a matter of, just having the right tool for the right job. But at the end of the day, like we've all talked about, those are all devices that capture that edge events, and being able to put that into a repository that leverages other data repositories within the within your organization. That's what helps you get to those desired business outcomes that you're looking for.
Excellent. And I'll just add a quick one, just from, having been in this space, for a long time, is the importance of quick wins, right? The importance of, as Sharmeen alluded to, finding that area where you're going to shine the light and put transparency on, but make sure that's going to be a quick win, because, all of the follow-on projects gain momentum by that initial win. So that's just, from the audience to take away. And, as we head to the top of the hour here, I want to thank all of the audience participants for joining us for this webinar. Feel free to reach out to any of us for additional information or to start a discussion. We'd be more than happy to do that. And as Mike said at the top of the hour, when we started, this has been recorded, so feel free to share this recording with your coworkers. And thanks for joining us on today's webinar. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks again, everyone, for your participation today. Thank you again, panelists, for all your knowledge. Greatly appreciate that. And I do have their contact information up here. I also have AIM North America's contact information as well, if you'd like to learn a little more about us as well. So thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.